do a deep dive on all of these things so that you can turn the dials in your own life to see where you think that you should have them for yourself. Okay, here are the big trends that we are looking at in the economy for 2025 and leading into 2026 even, and the big trends in real estate and money. So let's dive into this. First, I want to set the stage. Here's what's going on in the Western world that I think we all need to be aware of. There is a small amount of economic activity trying to deal with a large amount of debt. And I think it's really important to understand this because it's going to frame the importance of the trends that we're looking at in 2025 and 2026. And if you look at the debt to GDP in Canada and in the US, they're both over 100. And they came down a little bit in Canada and in the US because of the inflation that was ripping for a few years. And it looks like that is one way that the governments are going to try to pull down or correct the debt to GDP ratios. It's by spending a lot of money, throwing it in the economy, counting those dollars that devalue the purchasing power of the rest of the dollars in the economy. But it's one way to kind of artificially fix a debt to GDP ratio that's out of whack. And if I just show my advanced economics example here, is if governments print a lot of money or keep interest rates really low so that people borrow a lot of money, or just mail out pandemic checks or whatever they're doing, mail out new money to the population, you do get a higher GDP because you count all that spending and the GDP number goes up. And so then you can say, well, relative to the debt, now our GDP is higher. But what happens is, to get the new monetary units into the economy, you incurred new debt somewhere. So then it kind of corrects and the debt goes up, and then the debt to GDP doesn't really look as great as you were hoping it would look. And then you're stuck in this circular chasing your tail cycle where you're like, oh my gosh, you know what? We should have printed even more monetary units so that the debt to GDP looked even better. Now we should do it again. And then when you print more money and increase the GDP, the debt goes even higher. And it's just kind of like this chasing the tail strategy that just gets absolutely nowhere. But that's the world that we live in. And some of the factors that influence GDP, so these aren't the things that you count to make up GDP, but the factors that influence GDP just don't really look that positive. For example, population growth in the Western world is not the best. Not only that, labor force participation is not encouraging. If you look at labor force participation in the United States, you know, the biggest economy, Canada's neighbor, it's not great since the year 2000. It's going down and down and down. So that's not really a positive. Productivity growth, when productivity increases and you can put out more units of things per energy unit, and so the productivity is increasing in an economy. But if you don't have a growing population earning money to buy those things that the productivity growth is helping create, the productivity growth ends up being a drag because the productivity growth is pulling prices down because the economy is getting more efficient at creating things. So things are getting cheaper. So ideally you want people buying all those things, but if you have less people working, you're getting the productivity growth and things are getting cheaper, but you're getting no one really to buy those extra things. It actually acts as a drag. Productivity growth is pulling prices down, which is the natural state of entrepreneurs and an economy trying to pull prices down and add more value to the economy. And then finally, debt growth is just increasing. As our previous kind of example was showing, you have debt growth increasing, productivity trying to decrease things, but you have a GDP number that must go up. GDP has to always go up, otherwise we don't have enough money in the economy to pay for all the debt. So now you got this thing where what happens if productivity growth increases to the point where it's not like a 5% drag so that governments are trying to print enough money to offset that? What happens if productivity gets so great that's like a 15% drag? It's not a positive. It's actually a drag. It's pulling prices down, which might be good for me and you to get cheaper things, but for GDP, which has to continue to grow to pay for all the debt, it's not really a positive. So how much debt or how much inflation or how much deficit spending are governments going to do to try to offset that? So that's an advanced conversation that we're going to kind of just leave there for a moment, but it's just something to consider. So these are some of the factors that governments are playing with. So with that backdrop, what are some of the things that we're looking at in the economy as trends into 2025 and into 2026? The main trends that we're looking at from everything that we read and everything we look at are these. Artificial intelligence is here to stay. I mean, we're using it here at the office more and more. Marketing teams using it. I'm using it when I'm putting different presentations and doing some charting together, from graphics to just doing mathematical calculations. It's getting really useful. The next few years, that's obviously going to increase. So artificial intelligence, definitely a trend that's here to stay. What does that do to labor force participation? What does that do to the labor force in general? A trend we are watching. The next is computing power. We all know about Nvidia, making a killing selling all the chips, but data centers are going to continue to be built. There's going to be a need for computing power. This is a big trend that we're going to watch, and it leads to our next trend, definitely this year, leading into next year, and probably the rest of this decade, is energy. When you see a company that I used to work for called, Oracle Corporation, come out and say that they're going to spend $100 billion in nuclear power to help some of their data centers get energy, I mean, this is obviously a big trend. If Oracle is dipping its toe in the water with like $100 billion initial investment into nuclear power, nuclear and energy as a whole, a definite trend through 2025, 2026, the rest of this decade. And the last trend in the economy that we're continuing to look at is the debasement of the currency. Just because of the GDP stuff that we just talked about, governments have a need to spend more and more money. They don't have the money. They're going to have to print the money. When they print the money, it debases or lowers the value of all the monetary units that are already in the economic system. It leads to higher prices and things that we don't want to have higher prices, like housing. So this is going to continue. So those are some of the economic trends: AI, computing power, energy, and monetary debasement. That's what we're looking at through 2025 and into 2026. And then on the real estate front here locally, so in the greater Toronto area, these are the things our team is working at right now. Multi-units are continuing to be a trend. And we don't mean the big multi-units. We mean, 4plexes, 6plexes, 8 and 12 units. People, there's going to be demand for that kind of stuff. We could argue if this is right or wrong, but the trends that we see in 2025, 2026, and, further out in this decade are there's going to be more people per unit. Unfortunately, the value of the monetary unit is decreasing. Rents, although they might be softening a little bit, they're way up from like 5 years ago. So even if the headlines say rents are soft right now, relative to 5 years ago, rents are just like incredibly high. In 2010 in Hamilton, Ontario, we were renting out a whole house for like $1,400 for the house. Up on the Hamilton Mountain. So that would be, just for context, if you're not familiar with the area, like a 3-bedroom house, fully detached, front yard, backyard, driveway up the side. Now you would rent out that house likely as 2 units, with the main floor being like $2,500 and the lower unit being like $2,000, $2,100 or something around there. So you're going from renting out one house at like $1,400, $1,500 to now with the top and bottom being like $2,500, $2,600 for that whole house. So the amount of rents, the rents have changed. In student rental land, it was only a few years ago, student rental rooms were renting out by the room around the big universities in Ontario for like, $600, $650. Now it's $900, $950. It's not surprising to see $1,100 a room. We've even seen $1,200 a room for really updated student rentals around Western. We see $1,100 at Guelph. I mean, it's just incredible where rents have gone. So over the next little while, you're just going to see more people per unit, more units per property. Those are the big trends. And as a result, things like multi-units are definitely going to be an area in real estate that are going to continue to do, we think, really well. There's always just going to be demand. Conversions of single family homes into legal duplexes is going to be something that is going to continue to have a lot of demand. Places like St. Catharines in Niagara are offering $40,000 grants to legally convert a single family home into 2 units. Not a lot of people know about that. I think they're offering another $40,000, so up to $80,000 if you put like a garden suite in the backyard. So this is obviously a big trend when you see municipalities doing that kind of stuff. Student rentals, we talked about. Student rentals are just going to continue to have demand. They're getting a bit of bad press right now because Canada is saying, hey, we're going to lower the amount of foreign students because they went way over anywhere, any target that they should have had. They just went way over it. But some of the big universities have such a strong population base. They didn't really have a massive international student population to begin with. So if you look at some of the data around Western University, you can kind of see that that's the case. So the big, strong universities in Ontario, so like McMaster and Queen's and Brock and Western and Guelph, they're not going to be as affected by some of the changes to international students as some of the lower tier colleges in Ontario. So that's just kind of the reality of the situation. So student rentals. And then another trend is just going to be a property that someone on our team calls transformer property. So this is a property like one we have had over the years, where we had this property that we ran as a rent to own to an accountant that was going to buy the property from us. He got a new girlfriend, didn't want to buy the property, left that property. We turned that property from a rent to own into a student rental because it happened to be close to a school. This happened to be a college that we rented it out. After running it as a student rental, we were approached by the property managers who said they really had a nice family that wanted to rent it out. So we converted that to a single family rental. If that family ever chooses to move on and not rent from us, we'll probably convert that to a nice legal duplex. So that means one property was a rent to own, then a student rental, then a single family home rental, and possibly in the future, a duplex. So if you're looking at real estate as an investment vehicle, we want properties that we can transform into different things to use different strategies on it. So that'll be a trend. So if I was to summarize, it's multi-units, conversions of properties, student rentals, and transformer properties, so that they can be run as more than one thing or have more than one strategy. It's why we like single family homes so much, and we're not big into the condo world. It's just that single family homes give you just a lot of options. So that's some of the real estate trends. And then I just want to kind of put up this slide. This is something that we have shared with Rockstar clients of ours for a very long time, is that we believe in this 3-bucket strategy, where in our life, we want access to cash for emergencies and any deflation in the economy. We want to build up long-term savings. We're ex-gold guys. Now we're now we're big Bitcoiners. We are Bitcoiners. And finally, productive income producing assets, whether that's your own business or some income properties that are spitting off free cash flow, so that are positive cash flow. These are the 3 buckets we like to build in our lives. And over the last little while, it's become interesting. Whereas when we were saving long-term savings in gold, it was interesting, protected our purchasing power, but it wasn't that exciting. Bitcoin showed up on the scene, and Bitcoin's just exploding. Its compound average annual growth rate over just the last few years is in the 40-50% range. So when you can get compound annual growth over 4 years at a time, over 40%, close to 50%, it becomes a big part of your strategy suddenly. So Bitcoin is something that if you haven't gone down that path, we would highly encourage you to do it. And then the real estate bucket, we talked about some of the strategies that we would use on real estate. And everyone's going to have their own opinion. Like some people just love their career. They want a little bit of real estate, and they're going to check out this Bitcoin stuff. Other people have gone deep down the monetary rabbit hole, or the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and they're just all in on Bitcoin. Other people are big real estate investors. So we would just encourage you to do a deep dive on all of these things, so that you can turn the dials in your own life to see where you think that you should have them for yourself. So whether that's, how much emergency money do you need to have on hand? How much long-term savings do you want to have and do you want to build up? Do you want to add real estate to your life, or, and what strategy do you want to add real estate to your life? Are you going to do student rentals? Do you have someone in the family going to become a student and you want to get a property? So you just need to spend some time in these 3 areas. This has been really useful for us. And that's kind of how we're looking at it, a really high, quick level, 2025 and leading us into 2026 and the rest of the decade. Hopefully you found that useful. Talk to you soon.